Hey. So thank you all for coming and taking the interest in Baba's talks to the Meher Ashram boys, which is, of course, our subject. These talks were given by Baba between the collected talks that we have. This is the front sheet of one of the manuscripts we're using. And as you can see, or maybe you can't see.
Yeah.
Can you see?
1907, 1928.
Yeah.
Yes.
December 1927 to January 1928. Actually, it's from December 2nd, 1927 through January 14th, 1928. Those are the dates of the talks. And that was about 6 or 7 months into the life of the Meher Ashram. I'll be giving some of that history in a minute. And this was really the beginning of that huge volcanic explosion of love that happened among these boys. And what happened during this very period and what immediately followed it resulted in the creation of the Prem Ashram in March 1928. So the Prem Ashram had not been created yet when these talks were given, but it followed from the developments during this period. So this is a very crucial period. Actually, now that I'm getting to know Baba's life more as time goes on, it's very apparent to me that this was quite a unique phase. Of course, you could say that about many parts of Baba's life, but this certainly was. There was had never done anything like this before and never did again. When it was over, it was really over. And he really went on to other things. So it was quite amazing, the whole period. I'll be saying a little more about this, but this collection of talks is quite astonishing also. Even knowing the history of this ashram in this period, had I not read them, I would never have imagined that Baba would give such talks to a bunch of boys. This tremendous love welling up and as a tsunami was starting to happen right from the beginning of this, right from even December 2nd, as a matter of fact. And it got stronger and stronger, and on January 1st of 1928, the whole ashram was just wailing and crying, and you could hear them all the way to Erangown village. That's what they said. It was so powerful what had gone on. And these are the talks Baba was giving. And here's one of the things that's so surprising about them. They're high metaphysics and philosophy, mostly. At the end of most of them, I'll read some of these. Baba would say things like, and so what I have to say to you is, love me, Prem, cultivate Prem. But the whole talk had been about these really esoteric subjects, which would seem to have nothing to do with love at all. But obviously it was not experienced by these boys that way, obviously not. In fact, on that very day of January 1st, where the whole ashram was totally out of control, when Baba came, it all became quiet, and they would listen with rapt attention to what he was explaining to them. So obviously something was going on. You may know Gil Alvarado. Any of you know Gil Alvarado? Yeah. He lives in Chapel Hill with Chitra's wife, and he was had a link with Chugin, one of the early Mandali. In fact, Chugin quite literally died in Gil's arms. He just was actually embracing when he died. So that's a, if you're ever going to embrace him, you might have sort of, is this the full force or is this just sort of a lesser force? Anyway, Chuggin had told Gil that when Baba was talking to the boys, I have to get Gil to write this out in his own words, as you can remember Chuggin, as best you can remember Chuggin, but it was not like when Baba was talking to adults, because they're being sort of young and innocent. There was all these barriers were there, and he was self-evidently God, explaining completely directly to them. So, I mean, this has been a big meditation of mine. I've tried to imagine how it could possibly be that Baba would explain such material. I mean, the language is not difficult. The sentences are short as it's been written out, but the subject is so utterly sublime, from one sublime topic to another. And how could Baba explain this to a bunch of boys like this? And what is vivid to my mind after all these years of thinking about this is that when Baba would explain something, even if it seems like an abstract or transcendental topic, it would be so vivid that you could see it. It's like you could see him. He would be it. Like one little moment of an example. When Baba was explaining evolution to them, he had a little doll of a man, a person, and he would show through evolution how the human form was unfolding itself. So like in a tree form, the human form would be upside down. So you can just, I mean, you can imagine Baba, when you're talking about these things, he would be so spellbinding and so captivating that you could see it all. I mean, it must have been something like that going on with these kids. And I would myself imagine that, I mean, these must have been very unusual souls who showed up at the Meher Ashram.
And I'm just thinking too, and this is only 2 years after Baba began his silence.
Right.
So he's silent.
He's
and
silent.
also doing all this.
I know, and on top of all that, he's silent for a group of kids. Some of them were Gujarati speakers. Some of them were Marathi speakers. There was a whole gang of them who had just come from Persia, who were Farsi Persian speakers. How on earth? I've never seen an explanation. All the accounts of the Meher Ashram and Prem Ashram just cruise right over that as though it wasn't a problem. Why wasn't it a problem?
Who was translating?
See, I don't even know. They never say. It's sort of like somehow around Baba it all got attended to, and no one seems to have thought the matter important enough to comment on it.
Well, apparently they all got it. If they were all
Right?
trying.
They obviously did.
Bobby was still writing then?
No, he was using, he was at the alphabet board. He had stopped writing in January 1927.
I think the
early.
language they use is English, the common language.
But I wonder sometimes, because sometimes he would talk to the Persian boys, and he very well could have communicated there in Persian. So I don't know.
In Lord Meher says, the classes and things were conducted in English.
Yeah.
Could the boys see Baba?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, they were with.
Oh yeah.
Probably.
Here, I'll go over the history of it. At the beginning, it was the talks were given in what's now the museum room, the West Room, the West Tank Room, up on Meherabad Hill. Okay, well, I'll say more about this.
You may cover this, but what age were the boys? And did it differ? Did it change in time? Were they...
I'm not altogether sure because I haven't seen ages given. Just to look at photos, I would think between like 10 and 17 or 18.
I think
So they could read. they could-
Spandia was about the eldest.
Sorry?
Esfandiar? He was
Esfandiar
16.
Vasali.
He was probably the oldest. He was
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
16.
But
Yeah.
10's quite young, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very-
Alaba was there.
Yeah,
He was not one of the Prem Ashram
See, I
boys.
thought that,
You know, actually that being overpowered by love didn't happen to him at that time. You would think that if anyone was a candidate, you would think it was him, but it actually didn't happen with him.
Was
So
he,
he was the only one that remained, really, of
Yeah.
all of those boys.
On through. They all went home, and as the few who have been contacted appear to have led ordinary lives. You know, even Chota Baba, who was experiencing the sixth plane, for heaven's sakes. When Erwin Luck interviewed him later, I think he'd worked for the Red Cross, had a regular old job like that. So, you know, Baba never explained it, but I think there must be some universal work he was doing. And I also, this is just me talking, I don't, of course, would have no way of knowing, but it seems to me that these kids must have some great destiny. And Baba would often talk to them, seeming to make it clear they weren't in his circle. He had done a lot of work with circle members before that, and said so. Even Tiffin lectures was that. He said a lot about circle. These kids were not. So it makes me think maybe between now and the next Advent, these are going to be some big players.
Baba's discussion of the sixth plane elsewhere doesn't suggest that it's a temporary state
I know.
by any means.
I know once you're there, you never go back. So how did that happen with Chota Baba?
I was veiled.
Hmm?
Veiled.
Yeah, he was unveiled in the ashram. He was experiencing it, but I guess a veil came down. And Esfandiar Vasali, I mean, he was one of the only ones that we all got to talk to a lot, and it seems very clear that he was experiencing the planes. And later on in his life, it seems so, although it was pretty impossible to get him to talk about it directly. So
Actually, Baba gave him a taste of the sixth plane consciousness. I think unless it is permanent, you don't stay there. I don't know if it's veiled. Because in the Buddhist tradition, like Satori and things like that, they were given the experience of the emptiness, something of the nature of the mind, and then they come down, and from there they can have that faith and trust and start practicing to reach there one day.
but the way Baba talked about Chota Baba, it sounds like he really was having the experience of seeing God
He
face
was
to face.
six plane for 3 or 4
He really
days,
was having that.
but then Baba brought him down.
Yeah, I know. I thought that was against the rules.
I don't think Baba has any.
Not
We should
really.
say to Baba, rule makers can't be rule breakers, Baba. But it seems to have happened with him. I mean, who knows what the experience of these guys
But when you
was.
take other traditions into consideration, it's not against the rule at all.
Yeah.
You said that Oliver was there, but he wasn't in the Prem Ashram. Why was he there? He wasn't a Mandali person at that time.
Let me go over some of this history and
Oh,
how to
okay.
explain all of this. Because the Prem Ashram was not the Meher Ashram. It was culled from the Meher Ashram. But let me just show you here a few of these pages that I've been working. Actually, this has been my main work here. It's the main project. These are what some of these pages look like. Right now, I have a whole manuscript of them. I'll show some more now. But let's go back and take a little look at the history of this more. And I haven't yet really created, looked for getting photos from this particular period, but I have a few. This is what we're talking about mostly. You recognize this building?
Yeah.
If you don't, it would be understandable because it doesn't look like this now. This is the ground floor. This is the library, right? This is the East Room. And over on that side is where the museum is. Right now, there's a whole study hall on this, and then there's a tower like that. So this is Meher Retreat at Meherabad. What it had originally been when the property was first visited by Baba and then given to him was a water tank built by the British. And these doors here were made by Baba and his Mandali in June of 1927. So Baba used to go in here, and he would sleep here sometimes, and he wrote some of the book here too. And this is before this period. And there are little slit windows somewhere. I don't quite see where they are right now, but he would climb up and drop in.
Like on that side, on the east side.
Yeah, here we go, yeah. He would probably do that. But then it took several days. If you look at the construction, the British did very good screws, very, very thick. And it took several days to make these doors. In fact, Baba himself took part in this. And I think the first time Erich ever saw Baba, well, the very first time would have been down the hill, but some early occasion of Baba seeing, Erich seeing Baba, he was actually doing that work. Yeah,
Well,
true.
because of how it worked as a water tower,
Water tank, yeah.
water tank, how did it work?
It was probably lined inside.
It had the water get in.
Pump it.
Oh.
They must have pumped it in, yeah. And then being on top of the hill, they could use it to supply below. The details of this, I really don't know. If they had pipes or if they carried it in carts or what they did. I don't actually know. These are good questions to ask Peter Nardine, who is extremely knowledgeable and knows all about construction. And he could probably tell you, about each stone, where it came from and where it
It's
went.
also like very unusual shape.
Well, because
Yeah.
it needed to be so thick at the bottom to hold the water.
Ah, okay.
Like
Yeah.
a dam, if you think of
Pressure.
a dam wall, yeah, the pressure is really great at the bottom.
So it's like a dam.
This room must have been added.
Yes.
Yeah.
The library,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I know, it doesn't look original, does it? Well, it's hard to imagine. This kind of stonework, I went up to with Sheila Krinsky and Paul Limbron a couple of years ago to this prison, which Baba references in one of his Tiffin lectures. And there's a big reservoir there, many, many hundreds of acres. And the prison too, all show the same kind of stonework. Very, very similar. It's very good work. The British did very good work in this kind of thing. Here are some of the, these would be the Meher Ashram boys being photographed there. So they had been moved from down below the hill up to staying in these rooms, various groups of them at various times. I think that's Ali wrote. Right there, we don't. Here's, I think this might be Ramaji, who is having high experiences also. This is the boy Abdullah Pakraman, to whom Baba gave the name Chota Baba. Right there. Who was absorbed, as I say, in the sixth plane.
In the white floor.
In the white, yeah. Chota Baba means little Baba. Baba actually gave him that name. And, okay, that's, now, to go back to this whole business, I want to give you a little bit about the schools because there's a lot of confusion about this. As you may know, Baba first came to Meherabad in 1923, in the month, right after closing the Manzali. And here's a map of Upper Meherabad. Over the next 2 years ago or so, he was traveling all over the place with this mandali. They were living with this driftless sort of existence, and they didn't have a home at all. It wasn't at all clear, not at all, that Meherabad was a home base. And I don't think they knew where on earth they were. It was quite a mandali training period. But in January 1925, Baba began what we call the first long stay at Meherabad, where he actually settled in. And for that year, most of the action took place in Lower Meherabad, which is this. This is the Dharamshala. You know the Dharamshala? Mandali Hall is here now, but it wasn't built until later. This is the highway to Ahmednagar. These are the railway tracks. This is the road which is still there right in front of Mandali Hall and the Dharamshala. So a lot of the action in that 1926 was there. So if you're reading the Tiffin lectures, the real center of action was kind of like this area here, right where the big new road is going to come through. They found it perfectly. But in the next year, which is our period now, Baba really moved up the hill. And this is a dormitory, and this is a dormitory. So this is the water tank. And they built this crypt room. At the time, this is 1927, Ramju, writing about this, says no one could make head nor tails of it, because there was this little sort of pit dug there, barely big enough to get into, and then the small room overhead. Well, it's now the samadhi. So now we can see the purpose that it was going to serve, but at the time, no one could make head nor tails of it. And so in 1924, even before he moved there, Baba started to have a lot of the children from Erangown village, you know Erangown village, right, really flocked in to see him. In the next year, when Baba settled in, he resumed his contacts with these kids, and on 25th March 1925, they opened the Hazrat Babajan School. Now, so that's a completely different school than what we're talking about here. This was for Erangown children, and it included the range of castes who were there. And that included a good number of the Harijan caste, as they're called, the low caste. There are a lot of low caste people, Mahars, is that what they were called then, in Erangown. It was a very poor and illiterate village. So there was a subsequent history of the Hazrat Babajan School, and this was really basic education for very poor and very illiterate kids. But Baba had a boys section and a girls section. He separated them at a certain stage, and they were. There was actually a school building. There was a girls' school building right here. Let me show you. Right there. This is where the post office was, but the Hazrat Babajan Girls' School for a period of time was there. And it had a subsequent history, but its big period was for about a year and a half. And in November of 1926, sorry. So began 1925, Baba moved there and settled in January. In March 25th, he opened the Hazrat Babajan School. And in November of 26, he closed down the whole ashram. He looked like he was just leaving it. It looked like he was done with Meherabad and took off. That's a whole big drama in itself. And in the Tiffin lectures, that was a great, it's a traumatic moment for the Mandali. And he was going to go to Persia for 6 months, and then he revised it. And he wound up going to Lonavala with the Mandali, and then went to Bombay for a couple weeks. And then in December, he came back to Meherabad. It was sort of like, you know, a real shocker. He just closed everything down. And there he was back there again. But when he came back, a lot of the institutions had been ended. And a lot of these buildings had been torn down actually. They had just been built and then he tore them down. You know how Baba was like this. The Mandalay had to learn this, that he would start something and then stop it, just like that. And it seemed completely arbitrary to them. They got that training. But when he came back, it was very clear that he wanted to start another school, but of a different type, that would have students who really were capable of learning a lot more than the Erangel children were going to be able to do. And he was going to bring in kids from various places. And also, it was going to be a really high-quality secular education would be part of it. But Baba was really insistent. The most important part was the spiritual education. And in advertising literature, Baba had the advertisements rewritten to make that clear. Right from the start, he wanted that to happen. And so it really got moving very quickly. And the name of that institution was the Meher Ashram. I wrote all these names up here. This is the Meher Ashram and the Hazrat Babajan School. So the Meher Ashram is something quite different than the Hazrat Babajan School. And it was a boys' school. And he got various boys from that part of India. Even by March or April, even before the school as such had really been opened. He started opening the school and had a lot of boys, even from December of the previous year. But by March, there were already 70 of them there. I think in the Toka period of the Meher Ashram, there might have been like 200. So it was, it was a significant school. Yeah.
How did he, I don't know whether to use the word recruit, I mean, how did Baba choose them? I mean, you said advertising, which intrigued me.
Yeah, there were advertisements that were printed in publications. So a lot must have come that way. I know, I have the same question. I'm not altogether. Maybe it was mostly to that channel. Because I think they were not like local Ahmadnagar kids. There were a lot from Bombay. There were Hindus, there were Muslims. And in July, Baba had, Baidul, one of the Mandalay, who was from Persia, from Yazd, actually. He was sent to Yazd to try to get some students and came back with a dozen or so. And that included, as a matter of fact, Asfendir Vasali. And during that period also, Abdullah, who was renamed Chota Baba, also came. And these are just kids coming from an education. Nobody knew anything different at the time. And so there was a whole Persian group. So there must have been some kind of, I think there were separate classes, Persian, Marathi, English. They did it in different languages. Because you have a bunch of kids from Persian who didn't know English. In fact, Asfendir Vasali never did know English, really. When we saw him, he didn't speak any English at all.
It's all recorded in Lord Meher if you want more details.
Yeah, but I'm looking at a lot of the original diaries about all of this. And there was a whole staff that Baba had for this school. I think Meraji had been, some of them were hired actually, and others were Mandalay. One of the Mandalay, I don't know if you know Rausab, have you heard of Rausab? A lot of these early Mandalay, we don't, have sort of been forgotten, but he was definitely one of Baba's men Mandalay then. And he was in charge of the Persian boys, and had a lot to do with what happened over this whole period. Afsari was his actual name, Khusro Afsari, and a whole bunch of others. So it seems, in the stuff that I've been working with, at the end of August 1927, it was, the Tiffin Lectures comes to an end, and the combined diary also comes to an end. That's another 1924 to 27. And the Tiffin Lectures got typed up. I personally suspect that Infinite Intelligence got written up at that period. Korshed had compiled a manuscript of Baba's poems, and that was all written up at that time too. It's dated, actually. So it looks like, to me, that the older phase was being finished and sealed and done. I mean, they're finishing up with all of these manuscripts, because it was very clear that Baba's focus now was on the school, and that was what he was interested in. And in the previous time, the Mandali had, Baba really gave them a lot of talks, and was really focusing a lot on them with many other things. But from this period on, it seems like they just had to play their roles now. Baba was really focused on the boys. He was not going to give specialized attention to the men Mandali, except in the form of, like, one of his disciples, Vishnu, would do something wrong, and Baba would berate him for half an hour in front of all the schoolboys. They got specialized attention of that sort. They were not neglected, but they had to just play their roles and couldn't expect, you know, discourses and stuff like that. So the Meher Ashram then really was his whole focus. The poor women Mandali down in the post office hardly got to see him, and there are various stories they would tell about this, you know, how they wanted to get his attention once in a while, because he would just be spending all his time with the Meher Ashram boys. And it was in over this, it's a complicated story with the different classes and different places where the kids were, but by December, all of the boys had been moved up here and were staying here, right in this this complex. And he actually had another building built, the Meher Ashram up here, where some of the boys were put. And so classes had started. It was a very, and also I should mention there was another formal institution, and this, I know this gets confusing, but it's called the Hazrat Babajan High School. This is to be distinguished from the Hazrat Babajan School. They actually, and it was the formal institution under whose umbrella these schools functioned. There was a kind of an accrediting or standard setting branch of the government in Bombay, I forget what it's called, and they met all their standards and got whatever the accreditation would be. And it was actually the Hazrat Babajan High School that did that. So that was a formal institutional umbrella under which all of this happened. So right, we have this thing, the Meher Ashram, which kind of designates the ashram, the dormitory life, the whole life program that was going on. And in at the end of November, Baba really started giving talks to the boys, and it would happen at night, like 7 or 8 o'clock or so. He would come up the hill, and we don't have any accounts of how Baba did this. Again, it seems probably Baba would, I don't know, maybe Baba had given prior notes and some of the Mandali just read them out. It could be. But it seems in some cases, and probably overall, overwhelmingly probable that Baba would just discourse right there. And no doubt in English. But there must have been some translation going on into the Marathi and Persian and Gujarati would be the most important languages. But we don't have any account of that. It doesn't seem to have been a problem, it would seem. And Baba began fasting in November. And this fast went on for, I don't know, 80 days or so. Can you imagine all this going on, and here he is fasting the whole time? The fast became more intensified as it went on. Mera would tell the story of Baba would have a cup of coffee each day. I think that's as much as he had with milk in it, I think. And the boy who carried it up would drink half of it, because the poor kid was, not getting very much food in his life.
It was 5 months and a half.
5 months and a half, yeah. So, I don't know if you've ever tried, I've never, I think 7 days is the most I've ever done. And I wouldn't want to have to carry on an intense regimen of activity with 7 days fasting. Can you imagine with, months and months of not eating, all this going on? And at first, until December 20th or so, the talks were given here in this room. But on December 20th, Baba secluded himself in this strange crypt room, which is now the Samadhi. I mean, now we see its significance, but at that time, they couldn't make head nor tails of why Baba had this thing built. He would often sleep down in what is now the crypt, actually. He'd go down there and go to sleep. And he never came out at all for months, for I think 6 weeks or so. Or, I'm not remembering exactly how long, from December 20th. So at that point, Baba would sit at the window of the, if you're at the Samadhi, you're going in the door, there's a window on the right-hand side. He would sit at that window and talk to all the boys outside. So most of these talks were given in that way, is outdoors. Presumably the entire ashram, whoever didn't have duties, would show up and listen. Again, I haven't found a really detailed account of this, but that must have been happening. I don't think anybody would have missed it who wasn't otherwise engaged. And so Baba would give these talks that way. And another thing happened in December 2nd. There is this thing, the Sadak Ashram it's called. Is it marked here? I can't quite read. Here's the crypt. I think this would be there are these small cells. Right now where manis and so 4 of the women have their graves right there. If you're facing the door on the right-hand side, they had little meditation cells that were constructed, and 5 men went into them and were secluded in a meditation, starting on December 2nd, this very same day that our first of our talks happens. And a number of them began to have spiritual experiences. They were having their own, there were all these fireworks going on with them at the same time. So all of this began and it became obvious, starting in December, that something was going on, because Abdullah, who became Chota Baba, on the 10th of December started being overpowered and started weeping a lot, and little things like this were happening. But on January 1st, as I mentioned, it was like a mass outbreak of weeping among all these kids. They were just uncontrollably weeping, so that you could hear them from a quarter mile away. And this went on for a couple days, and then it subsided. But a few of the boys were being completely transported into higher experiences. Chota Baba is one, Ramaji is another. You can read about a lot of this in Rabju Abdullah's book, Sobs and Throbs. You know Sobs and Throbs? In Rabju's diaries, it's included. But that's actually kind of narrowly focused. Baba asked him to write this book about Ali, who was one of the Meher Ashram boys at the time. And he wasn't at first so overpowered as the others had been. But at the end of January, and this is after the period of these actual talks, things really began to happen with him. And he had this, right at the end of January, weeping so uncontrollably that they were afraid he was going to die. And Baba said he would have died, but then Baba gave him a kiss on his forehead and he was completely still and went into a coma for several days. I mean, well, some kind of spiritual coma, and then gradually came out of it. And all this stuff began to focus on Ali at that time. I won't recount that whole story, except to say that his father, a lot of the, they call them Mughals, would be Muslims, I think from the Bombay area, got very alarmed about the school. All these stories started spreading, and a lot of the fathers started coming to pull their kids out of the school. In January, this began to happen, and this happened a lot with Ali, and he got dragged home to Bombay, and then he ran away and somehow made his way back to Meherabad, and again his father would get him and drag him to Bombay, and he ran away a whole bunch of times. This happened. It was quite a drama that happened surrounding Ali. And Baba would say, if Ali, doesn't come back, I'm going to close down this ashram. All these great high dramas were going on in connection with it. I'm not going to go over the history of the Meher Ashram and Prem Ashram in much more detail, because that's a huge story in itself. But I'll give you these little things. In March, Baba actually created the Prem Ashram. And what the Prem Ashram, so you see there's a difference between the Meher Ashram and the Prem Ashram. The Meher Ashram was actually the school, or the ashram encompassing the school with formal classes and instruction in secular subjects also, along with spiritual subjects and Baba's talks at night for a period there. But the Prem Ashram is the name for a group of boys who were so overpowered that they just couldn't study. It just wasn't practical anymore to keep them. So they got segregated into their own group, about 20 or so. And the Prem Ashram remained in the picture. I don't know when it was formally dissolved, probably 1929 or so. In June of 1928, Baba was dissatisfied with Meherabad, in the month of May actually, and he said, let's move. So within about 2 weeks they moved to Toka, which is, 30 miles up the road or so.
I think it's because of the water shortage in Meherabad.
Yeah, perennial problem going on.
Lots of water at Tokyo.
And Toka's right on a riverbank. And they were in Toka for 6 months, but then Baba didn't like the climate and the weather, and they wound up moving back. So can you imagine moving a whole ashram? I think they were saying 400 people were involved in the shift.
So the Prem Ashram went as well.
Yeah. The Prem Ashram was always intimately connected with the Meher Ashram. It was never, those boys had been separated, and Baba would give special talks to them. And from 1929, after coming back to Meherabad, Baba gradually began to wind operations down. And the boys got sent home. I think they ran out of money. That was one problem. And so the story kind of ends in 1929. With some of those boys, though, Baba maintained a link with them, particularly Ali, with all the dramas going on with his father. I mean, the father would come and the mandali would spend all day pleading with him, and then he would say, okay, you're doing a good job of educating my boy. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, he'd come back and take him back home. But Ali did wind up going with Baba to the West on his first trip in 1931. And when Baba went to the West, no one had the slightest idea that Baba was going to do that. All of a sudden, he was gone and sent a telegram from the boat. That was the first they heard about it. And Ali was with him on that first trip. And then Ali's connection came to an end, and he disappeared from the picture too. So that's some of the historical background. So if you can imagine, this is the key. These talks are given up on the hill. Then the first 2.5 weeks were given from what's now the museum room. This room here, the West tank room, and after that they were given from what's now Baba's tomb shrine, the Samadhi, out that window looking towards what's now the Sabha Manda. Okay, so that's history. Any questions about this historical background? Sure.
I remember Jill telling me and Jeff about Changan, what Changan told him.
Yeah.
He said when Baba was explaining about God to the
Yeah.
Mandalay, Baba closed God in language.
Yeah.
So when Baba explained God to the boys, Baba somehow made them see God.
Yes. Yes. As I remember Gil talking about it, it's almost like he was God, talking to them directly, though, God personified. And I think I remember Asfendir talking about how the boys were just wild about Baba. They would grab him and try to tear his clothes and hang on him and all this sort of thing. So that's when these talks were given, when that was really starting to gear up over this period.
Did any of those boys told their story in writing?
Chodar Baba gave an account of his experiences, that's there. And Asfendiar talked about it many times, and that's been recorded. We have from them.
Where is that being recorded?
Some of the Iranians in California know a lot about that. Or Farshid, or Farhad, I forgot his name. He's writing a book on Asfendiar. So,
They did recordings of him at the Meher Center too.
yes, he was recorded many, many different places. He would tend to tell his own story because he was probably unconscious of everything else. He hadn't, we would never especially know about Asfendiar had he not lived to tell the tale. He just would have been a name of Prem Ashram kids. But wow, what a story he has. Oh my God. So you can imagine what must have been going on with some of the others.
Well, when Locke and his brother did an interview of some of them, it seems from his diary. It's included in this book.
Who is that? Sorry.
Well, when Locke and his brother
Okay.
did interview of Choti Baba later. And
Yeah, they
it's
found
included.
everyone they could at that time. What was that, 1973 or something like that?
And also on the internet you can find
Mhm.
also Khosrow, another Iranian Persian boy, his story too.
Yeah,
Khosrow.
yeah,
His
yeah.
Amir's mother came to Baba through him.
Yes, yes.
His story.
I tried to sit down with Alaba at one point, and I think I do have notes here, but it was impossible to get Alaba to really talk about these things.
He wasn't in the Prem
It's funny.
Ashram.
I remember him saying, yes, the Meher Ashram was very good school, high quality, good classes, and that's kind of all I ever got.
But some of the boys, I remember saying, for the 2 years they were with Baba in the Meher Ashram, they learned. But several years in normal school outside were just ordinary education.
Yeah.
Concerned. And when they left, they really missed Meher Ashram. It was so full of love. And,
Yeah. You know, some of the things you can read is Ramju Abdullah Sobs and Throbs really gives a lot. And also Rasa Kaikushru Apsari is his actual name, wrote a book in Persian, so you can just grab his book in Persian and read that. But in case your Persian is rusty, the Glow published the first half of it in a recent issue, and it's about the Meher Ashram. It's a lot of it is anyway, and the rest of it will get published soon, I presume. And also, Dastur, K.J. Dastur, wrote a book about the Meher Ashram that Jim Migdal had a copy of. He sent me a PDF of it, and so I presume it must somehow be available in the
What's
library.
that you took that substitute?
No, it's a book by K.J. Dastur about the Meher Ashram, who is the editor of the magazine starting in 1929, the Meher Message. He was an early disciple of Baba who turned against Baba. But he was kind of the designated writer, actually. So he wrote a book too about
What's
that.
the book?
Hmm?
What's the book?
I've forgotten the title. There must be, I don't know if the library has it or, I mean, I don't think the original would be accessible. It would be worth printing out so people could read it.
But maybe it was in Jim's.
This from
some
Jim?
of the stuff. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, no,
in
it's
the
Jim.
archives.
Yeah,
It
he
was
had it.
donated.
Yeah. So we do have things from this period. Now these talks themselves, one of the questions that I haven't been able to answer is what sort of completeness does our manuscript represent? Because I keep reading in diaries and other places that Baba started giving talks from the end of November. There'll be little references to this here and there. But the first talk is dated 2nd December 1927. Here, let me show you the manuscript. This has been the main source we're working with. I know this is going to be a little bit dark, but you get the idea anyway. Yeah, this is like the first page of the first of them. And you see this big gap right here. And here, it's for a figure, for a diagram that never got filled in. This manuscript has, that we found, here's the, oh yeah, good, I have it here. This is a copy from the Pearsons, and they dug it up and sent copies to me about a year ago or so. And this one has the diagram. See? So this is the sort of thing that makes me, jump around in jubilation and wild ecstasy when it happens. Because this is actually quite an extraordinary diagram, though I'll explain it presently. But the manuscript looks like this, and oops. Here's just a few other pages, like here. You see a diagram there. Here are 2 pages that illustrate. There would be the primary manuscript that was, okay, let me tell you, this manuscript was found at Meherabad in the same briefcase that contained Infinite Intelligence in the Tiffin Lectures. This was the 3rd item there. It was quite a treasure trove, wasn't it? in the 1920s. And it was found by Balnatu. Erich sent Balnatu to look into the rice go-down, it's called. A go-down is like a storage shed, and the women's side of Meherabad, shortly after Baba dropped the body. And I've never heard why Erich asked Bal to do that. I would presume Erich must have had the idea that something was there. Otherwise, why would he send Balnatu? Balnatu would be a good person to go there because the men didn't go to the women's side. They really never did, even after we were there and we would go over, but they really didn't. But Balnatu would be this sort of innocent person to send them a mission into hostile territory. And,
Wasn't Balnatu doing research for his glimpses of God-man?
yes, but this was, I think, before that. Before he was doing it, but even before that, he would take notes and compile things and would do work of that type. So Erich must have had the idea that something was there. Anyway, it turns out that my God, those 3 works are like atom bombs, you know, there. And so there's the whole story. I won't retell it now of how Erich had it. Merwan Jesawala, his brother, read it, and finally in 1997 it got read out to our publication committee, and we've been working on it ever since. So Infinite Intelligence has been published, and the Tiffin lectures have been published, but this is the 3rd one. By the way, there's a lot going on in the Department of Archiving here at Abode right now, and this would be a topic in itself. You can see this is where certain archival, this is the next stage that a lot of them go through when they start to get studied like this, and compared and compiled, and editions are published on the basis of them. You know, look at in the past, they did this with the Quran, actually. They went over different versions that had been copied down and different people who remembered them, and they compiled an edition of the Quran under the early caliphs. The Rashidun caliphs are probably the right ones. But here are there'd be a top sheet copy and then a carbon copy. You can see that, right? These are the same page, right? And this is the carbon copy, and that's the top sheet copy. And with the Tiffin lectures, as with this, the carbon copy is regularly the more important source for editing purposes. And this shows why. This is how the diagram looks. And a lot of times the diagram is not filled in at all, it's just completely blank. But I know it's a little bit hard to read, but this is awake state, dream state, sound sleep state, divine dream state, and divine awakening state. These are the 5 conscious states. It's a big topic in Infinite Intelligence, and it comes up in the Tiffin lectures and other places. Tony has been part of these sessions in Meherabad, where we went over this a lot. In fact, we might have in God Speak sessions too. But look at how it's shown here in this carbon copy version. Let's see. I mean, it's much, much more developed. Here are the 5 states. And do you know what this is? It's a hat. It's Baba's hat. So, though it doesn't say, clearly, it seems to me obvious, Baba was illustrating it. He took off his hat and do like that, and like this, and like that, and like that. The hat in different positions to illustrate the different states. So, what ordinary wakefulness, ordinary dream, sound sleep, divine dream, and divine awakening. So he showed
Is that the same hat illustration in John Grant's book?
Yeah.
Oh, is it there?
I did similar thing. Yeah.
Aha, aha. Maybe Baba did it here. He must have, I bet.
When he was explaining.
Yeah. He repeated what he had shown to these Meher Ashram boys all those years ago. Oh, that's neat. I didn't know about that.
So would these lectures were given verbally and then someone typed them up straight away? I mean,
Yeah, I know, this is one of the things that I wish I knew more about it. We don't know definitively who took the notes, but recently, one of Chanji's diaries, I've finally been going through it, which is not an account of this, but it does give a daily diary of what was going on all the days of this period. And it will often say vide, the vide would be the Latin, notes, vide notes, and look at notes. And what it seems to be indicating is there's a notebook that compiles notes for these talks. And the exact same designation appeared in the case of Tiffin lectures. And in that case, it was definitely Chanji who compiled the text of sources. So probably it's Chanji, probably. But there were other players who were very much involved in the story. Ramju was there then at the time, and he was doing a lot. Baba was giving me notes, and Dastur, KJ Dastur, was also in the picture. So someone, maybe someone else wrote them up, or maybe Chanji wrote them up, I'm not sure. We don't have the notes that are the source of this type text. But my strong bet would be that this was done very quickly. Around Baba, you had to move, for one thing. And once a period was over, there was no going back. It's like, you know, the year before was like ancient history. The dinosaurs 50 million years ago. It's so far gone, you wouldn't even think of going back there, because you were always on the edge of a knife with Baba. So I think they probably did this.
and the notebooks were not, they were found?
No, they haven't
Yeah, they
been.
haven't.
We found some of the sources here. There are these, a couple of sources we have. And I'll just give you a little. This has been a lot of my life, and others have been involved in this too. Actually, Tian did a good bit, and some people in India are also helping with this. Here's another source that got found. This was in, I don't know if you can see it very well, but this is Ramju Abdullah's handwriting. And this was found among the, this was not found, this Merwan Jaswala had these, and he let us scan them. And it's related, it's very complexly related. It's not a transcript of these talks at all. It goes into different topics, but then there'll be passages or sentences that are word for word the same. So my best guess is that Ramju had these notes and was working on writing up something from it. And here's another, I've been calling this in my notes, Ramju Green Pen. I'll have to come up with a more elegant name eventually. And here's another one of these sources. This is even more important, actually. I know it'll be hard to read. That one's very hard to read. That one. I had to bring out the contrast. It's so faint as to be illegible in its original form. But this is a pencil version, and some of the gaps, there's actually a page missing. The typed version that I showed you, it begins on page 2. And I was able to reconstruct it from here. It was quite a difficult job. But you can see, and like a lot, in those 2 pages, a lot of the diagrams are missing, but here we go. You can probably see, see the diagram there? So that's going to go in the book because it was found here. And here's another diagram, which again is missing in the typed manuscript text. So again, this manuscript, handwritten manuscript, is very complexly related. It's a bit of a puzzle to figure out how. It's not the same at all in its totality, but chunks are even word for word the same. So there must be some genetic relationship.
So when did this discourse take place that that Merwin had in his possession?
Well, this manuscript was found in Merwan's papers, and there's no date on the manuscript.
Following whose demise?
This was in the papers of Merwan Jesawala.
Yeah. Well, how long ago?
Well, I mean, I knew about it from, really started focusing on this project after Infinite Intelligence was published. And, he just had it in his papers.
He'd never bothered to associate it with anything in particular.
Well, there hadn't really been time to work on it yet. I mean, it's quite a job to make sense of this, actually. But Merwan was really the key to this editing and publication work, both in the work he did himself, and he opened the door to the whole thing. And so he just let us scan this when I asked for that. And so I've studied this a lot. It's quite a tangle to work out its relationship to the...
Did he do much work after Infinite Intelligence, helping you with Tiffin and this one?
No, not so much. He was getting older, and also he was very burdened at Meherabad. So with Tiffin lectures, I would ask him really important questions, and he played a very big role that way, but he wasn't involved in the hands-on work, and he really wasn't involved in this much at all. He passed away, and really didn't have the energy to involve in it. It's a real pity, a great soul like that.
Did he ever suggest appropriate time for this, like in the 1920s or?
No, he didn't, but its relationship to the talks to the boys is pretty indisputable, because there'll be passages that are word for word the same. So it seems most likely to me that Ramju, there are some references to Chanji's diary, was probably taking this material and going to work it up into some sort of book or some kind of published thing. That's the best guess I can think of.
This is Ramju's handwriting?
Yeah. It's not at all finished, but like this is a major diagram. I mean, actually, for those of you who were at the Buddhism session yesterday, you may, I don't know if you can read this, but right down here we have God, the ocean. Here's the creator at the home point. Do you see this? Emptiness, hollow, nothingness. Remember that yesterday? Shunyata was the word that we came up with for that. That means that emptiness. So this is really, really important material. Let me just re-emphasize this. This collection of talks is, I am certain, going to be of major importance over the coming centuries. There's no doubt about it. Because Baba told these kids stuff he had never told the Mandali, so far as we know. Nothing, he hadn't told them anything like it. And he never really went back to again in the same way. You won't find it in God Speaks or discourses or anything like that. A lot of these, some of it is there, but particular topics that Baba explained, he changed his way of explaining it later on. And whole themes and perspectives sort of dropped out of the story. But he gave it to them. He gave it to these kids. And here's another important, I'm just giving you the various textual correlates of this. In 1929, the Meher Message started to get published. And it was a monthly magazine edited by K.J. Dastur, who had been brought on board in 1927. Baba actually hired him, although he was one of the mandali, you would say. And as a writer, that was his specialization. And he was the editor of this magazine, and it came out every month. And there are about 100 pages per issue, so it's quite a substantial magazine. And what happened?
Lost it.
Oh, I know what's happened. This fell out. Here, I've got it plugged in. It's run out of power. Shoot. He's probably trying to tell me this for the last 10 or 15 minutes. It'll come back in a minute. But it came out every month. And there's various series of articles that are published in Baba's name, as Meher Baba is the author of them. And this is another project we're going to have to take on, how to republish these. But some of them contain material that is unmistakably related to these talks to the boys. It looks to me, for various reasons, that Ramju was probably the primary one who wrote them up, and probably Dastur edited them for the English. And a lot of this, as I say, is directly, not all of it is, but a lot of it is very directly related to the talks to the Meher Ashram boys. See if this will work now. No, it's decided not to work. So these are, you can, yeah, like this drawing is actually there in the manuscript I showed you a minute ago. So there's a whole large body of material that's related to these talks to the boys. What the explicit connection is a real puzzle, and probably there'll be different schools of scholarly opinion, and they'll duke it out over the centuries to come. Now, the talks as we have them, as I say, they begin. We have diary accounts saying Baba started giving them at the end of November. And we do have some from the Pearsons, long manuscripts of, not long, manuscripts of talks or of discourses from Baba, probably to the Mandalay though, not to these boys. Or maybe it was material being prepared for presentation to the boys. That could be. We do have some names of Mandalay who are involved. Hafiz, about Rumi or Hafiz, or about Sanskaras or other topics like this. So I'm thinking to put this in this book too, the back part of it. But there are also references to Baba starting giving talks to the boys. But the first actual talk that we have is dated the 2nd of December, and the last of them is January 14th. And I haven't been able to determine whether Baba kept giving talks beyond January 14th or not. But that's the last of such talk that we have. So one big question is this a complete work or is it not? But it was typed up by somebody as a complete work. So whoever did that must have had some reason for believing that this particular body of material deserved to be its own manuscript. In any case, when I look at it, it does show a very clear organization. And it looks like it's a real series of talks with a beginning and a middle and an end, or maybe not an end exactly, although it's getting close to an end. And the general organizing theme overall is the divine theme. Infinite intelligence was not about the divine theme. The divine theme comes up, but that's not its organizing topic. But for this manuscript, it is. And this seems to be its general sequence of things. It begins with several broad discussions, one about religion and Shariat and the tariqat and the role of Shariat. You know Shariat, the Sharia, as it's called, the external husk of religion, why that is given to humanity, but you have to go beyond it to the inner path and find a guru. All that is explained at the beginning. And then Baba starts talking about primordial creation, and in particular starts talking, has a lot to say about Pran and Akash. I think this has come up here, right? Have you heard of Pran and Akash? And this is not explained in God Speaks. Many other things he talks about in connection with Pran and Akash. It's not just that. But I would say that the most developed account of this topic is here in these talks to the boys. God Speaks, Baba never tried to bring it up again. In the discourses, he didn't try to bring it up. But it's a really big part of the creation story. And actually, the whole metaphysics of the universe, Prana and Akash play a big role in it, actually. And many other things about primordial opposites and the emergence of consciousness out of that. So there are a whole series of 4, 5, 6 talks where he's really, and this is a hell of a topic for a bunch of kids, right? I don't know if any of you have ever taught, we call them grades. I don't know, Lorraine, did you ever try explaining Prana and Akash to your 10-year-olds? No. I mean, it doesn't seem like this would be a promising audience for such a topic, but it obviously was. And then from that, Baba then began to talk about evolution. And there are 4 or 5 talks about evolution. As I mentioned, Baba seems to have had a doll that he used. The human form is innate in every form of creation, and he was showing how the human form, opens up through the course of it. And in the course of that, he explained about sanskaras. He told them about that. Sanskaras are not a huge topic in these talks, but he definitely gives, at one point, really brings them up with emphasis. And then he didn't say very much about reincarnation here, but in the last series of talks, about 14 or 15, there are 34 total, Baba starts to tell them about involution in the planes. And this is really quite amazing stuff, because if you read, in God Speaks, you would have read about, the planes of consciousness. That's told about and in discourses. But Baba explained a whole different aspect to this subject, which is the distinction between the planes and the skies, or the Indian word is asmans, planes and asmans. And he gave a lot of detailed information about it. The asmans are domains connected with the planes, but not identical with the planes. And when you're in the involutionary path, you can get into these skies or asmans, and you can get lost in them. I suspect that's where a lot of the musts were. They were lost in the skies, or the asmans. And Baba gives detailed information, like there are 3 of them associated with the first plane, there are 2 connected with the second plane, there are 3 connected with the third plane, there's 1 connected with the 4th plane, stuff like that. And he gave names for them, and said a little bit about what's in them. And in Gary Kleiner's phrase, for this audience, that was indeed news you can use, because a whole bunch of these boys, Baba was really talking about this at the end of December and the beginning of January, and that's when they were starting to have experiences of the planes, just as he was explaining it all. So it's quite amazing what was happening at that time. And the last few of them talk about prana, or energy, and how it flows down from the seventh plane all the way down to the planes into the gross world, and what happens on the different planes. Have you ever heard of that before? I didn't know it flowed down, but it seems to. He even describes it as like the fourth plane is a big waterfall, for example. So it's amazing stuff that he was giving to them. So it's an account of the divine theme. Yes, that's true. But it's full of material that I've never seen before. And there's nothing, you won't find anything like it in those speaks.
Are the Asmans in the Hindu tradition or in the Zoroastrian?
I don't know enough about it, and I haven't seen it in the reading I've done. I did make an effort because he gives Persian names to them. I did send a list of these to Carl Ernst, and he said he had never seen this system before. Whether it's there in Sufism, I don't know. I haven't seen it. I would really like to know if anybody, ever, I know there's a room full of people who've read all the Sufi works in Arabic and Persian and Urdu, so if you bump into this, I'm joking, but this is a very big question.
But this would be priesthood because it's Zoroastrian.
Well, Baba was using Persian names for it, so and they sound Islamic.
Because the Apsar, what was that chap's name? What was his name? Apsari.
Apsari, yeah.
Because an Apsara is like a Zoroastrian angel, and it was the opposite when it moved into Hinduism. It became the Apsaras became the demons, and the Devas were the angels, but the Devas were the devils.
Right.
Yeah.
When you go between Zoroastrianism and
They would have occupied these skies.
Yeah. I haven't been able to really find out about this. It looks closer to Sufism than anything else, though, just from the names. And Baba does, for example, here's a little detail that he gives. The second plane is where heaven and hell are. And those are the two skies of the second plane, heaven and hell. And on the third plane, there are three skies. And in the second of those three skies, the Devas and Devis are. Deva and Devi, gods and goddesses. And an Islamic word used is farishte, which we would translate as angel, for example. So, and there is a hint that they appear in the heaven and hell states to people there. So they have to commute from the second sky of the third plane down to the heaven and hell state on the second plane. I don't know how long it takes them or how the traffic is going down between the planes.
How about in Baoji's, the nothing and everything?
Yeah, and I'm not going to go into that for various
But
reasons.
Baoji does use the Hindu terms for those places. He called it Shiva Lok or Brahma Lok,
Yeah,
and use Indra and all that.
right.
So you think that has nothing to do with Hinduism?
No, that does, no. But I've not been talking about Baoji, I'm talking
I know,
about
but
history.
Baba did see very similar scheme in Baoji's book. The three skies in the first and then third. Or the
Yeah, there's a lot in the nothing and the everything. I personally think that this may have been one of Baoji's sources. That's my own opinion. Yeah,
I
Trish?
totally miss what prana and akash is. Prana is
Yes.
energy.
Pran is energy,
Yeah.
and Akash is something like space.
Like what?
Space.
Space?
Yeah, these have a big history in early Hinduism. I tried to see if where Prana and Akash are used conjointly, and I haven't. Again, my readings are limited. I know that Vivekananda talked about them, if anyone before him did. They're talked about individually, but the original creation as prana and akash separating out, and then they clash. And that's where the first jivatma happens. I don't know if that has a prehistory in Hinduism. I haven't seen it, but of course my reading is so limited in all of this, and Hindu literature is so vast. If anybody finds out about this, I would like to know. But that's the creation account that we get here of Prana and Akash, which Baba gave to the boys. And there's a lot more. I don't know how much we'll ever get into because this is a big manuscript, but Baba Pran winds up turning into the inner worlds, the subtle and mental sphere. He called it subtle in those days. And Akash winds up turning into the gross world. And in the human body, the Akash, or subtle mental, is from the neck up. And the gross is from the neck down. He explains all of that here. That comes up.
When you say it's a big manuscript, how big is it?
Actually, it's a big manuscript from the standpoint of a one-day session. It's not that big. About 100 pages or so.
Right.
So it's actually fairly short.
Mm.
But it's really packed.
Okay.
And the prose of it is not that difficult to read. Here, I'll read just a little bit to give you an idea of it. I mean, it's not like they're long. It's not like God speaks sentences or anything.
So you said that up on the board there you had 34 talks. Are those all in the manuscript?
Yeah, there are 34 talks in the manuscript. Now that's the thing. There may have been more that are germane to this. I would have to. I'm trusting that whoever made that selection did so for a reason. You know, it's an effort to write up talks and type them up. And they must have had some reason for doing that, and so maybe it's complete, but we don't know that for sure. These are busy guys, and they may have just sort of, you know how, you never do this at Avatar's Abode, but you've got a lot of work to do, and you sort of say, okay, we're going to do this, and it may not be the best decision in the whole world, but it's the one that was made at the time. It may be that. They just decided to start there. I just don't know. I don't know. Okay, in the above figure, the signs A, B, C, D, E, and F, etc. indicate so many religions of the world. Now, who gave these? The prophets, i.e. Sadgurus, who were, after being realized, came down for their duties. And what is the aim of their coming down to this world, leaving the eternal bliss and to realize it? So you see, it's perfectly, readable. You know, it's I myself imagine that Ramju might have been involved in this. So let's start. In fact, why don't we start? The one I was going to take is the actual edited manuscript that I've been working with in its current state. So it won't be like a nice published book or anything. The beautiful typographic layout is just going to be Word file stuff. But this is an Here's from the very first of them. And that's that diagram that I showed you from the Pearson's collection. Oh, it's all blurry, isn't it?
Low resolution.
Is that it? Oh, shoot. Yeah, that wasn't so bad in my screen. Doesn't look like that. No, maybe it does. Okay. Anyway, sorry, I just converted my Word file and exported it into a PDF. Wouldn't that do? Doesn't do it?
Oh, it drops a lot.
Oh, shoot. Okay. How was the universe created? So this is the very first of them. There are innumerable universes interwoven with each other, as indicated under item 1 in figure 2 above. So innumerable indeed are these universes that they cannot be counted even by realized beings like Shri. Baba is always referred to as Shri during this period, who with Maharaj once tried to do so. This is in Lord Meher, you may have read that there. It is quite strange that though these chains of innumerable universes continually emanate, issue forth from a Sadguru who absorbs and eats them up again, they cannot be counted. This fact was proven one night at Sakori, when Shri and Maharaj, sitting in Maharaj's Jopati, were talking about the subject of calculating the number of universes. Both of them, each in turn, tried to carry out the experiment. The first to make the attempt was Maharaj. Now, to calculate and fix the exact number of universes which flow in a regular chain continually without a moment's intermission, one has actually to stop the flow in order to check and count up as many universes as possible. But this cannot be done, and there are reasons for it. I mean, this is kind of an amazing thing. I mean, in those days, nobody in the world of science would have bought into the idea of innumerable universes, but now it's commonplace. It wasn't then.
Or in this edited version, you have bold and you have light, so what's
No,
that?
that's just an artifact of the turning it into a PDF.
Oh, okay.
It's not real. Or sometimes it's not true here, but sometimes it's because I have green font, which means one thing, and black, which means another. That when it gets, turned into a book, it will be done in different ways. For some slight trouble is caused by this attempt to stop the flow. The trouble arises due to the concentrating of one's mind and whole force on that one point alone. All thoughts center around this one issue. And this act of concentrating for the sake of stopping the flow of universes in order to count them causes and precipitates duality, plurality, dvaitya, from unity. Unity being the state of the realized one. This causing and precipitating duality may sometimes prove fatal to the gross body, which cannot stand the strain. And so the body may even have to be dropped in a tense moment. It was for this reason that Maharaj checked Sri Baba in his attempts to stop the chain and count the universes, as this attempt would endanger the very life of the physical body of Sri, as explained above. Indeed, as Maharaj said, no one has ever succeeded, not even the perfect masters. And why not? For the reason explained above, that Swayambhu, the self-originating reality, starts from the masters. And if it were stopped for the purpose of counting, this attempt would cause and proliferate dualism, and so much trouble would ensue that the very life itself, physical existence, would fall into peril. As said, events actually did play out like this with Shri's own gross body once, when, in a tense moment of trying to count the universes, his physical body came into danger, so that Maharaj had to step in once and halt the attempt and stop the process. So that's a pretty extraordinary account to be telling a bunch of kids. And this is, for years we didn't have a diagram until this one was found. Do you see what it is? This is clearly an eye. And that must be the innumerable universes. So I presume it's showing Bob Shri or Maharaj looking at the universes. Now, in a million years, I never would have thought of that idea to fill that space in the manuscript.
Would you say that eye is the third eye or one of the ordinary growths?
I would think it's a third eye, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
It must be. I mean, it couldn't be the ordinary eyes. Yeah. But now here, and this comes up in many other places in the manuscript, where Baba does say that there are innumerable universes. And then East-West Gathering in 1962, Baba said the same thing. And he said that scientists would come to know this in the course of time, though they would never be able to get in touch, contact them. That would be impossible. So this was a theme of Baba's from even the 1920s. So, in fact, since we probably won't get to it, Baba does say later on in these talks, he says, now I'm going to tell you a secret. Each individual is his own universe. So I could talk for an hour or two about that because I've thought about it a lot. I think it's a very important part of Baba's darshana, as a matter of fact. The microcosm-macrocosm relationship. So that stuff this book has that really doesn't come up in other places. So anyway, any comments on the accounting of the universes?
So what was that quote again at the very end? Each one is...
Each individual, I think it's individual, or person, I forget which word he uses, is his own universe.
Own universe, okay.
Yeah.
Phyllis Frederick talks about when you die you create that. You create your own in the afterlife as well.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot. I think it helps to solve a huge problem that I've often had in trying to make sense of a lot of the things Baba says. And I think microcosm, macrocosm is a big part of that.
In some of the meditations in other esoteric schools, like the Surya Yoga and the Taoist and things, when they go into a deep samadhi, they can see within the third eye, the whole universe.
Right.
All within, not the gross one.
I remember there's a comment Baba made, I think it's in Beams. He was explaining why it is that you need the grace of a perfect master, when originally the very first one who did it, who came back as the avatar, did not. And he gave this reason, that in order to realize God, you have to be in harmony with everything in the entire universe. And the help of the perfect master is a huge factor within the universe. And if you're not accepting it, you're not actually attuned to everything in the universe. So that, to me, it fits in with it. I think when you get God realized, your entire universe does too. And it's gone. One of those universes is merged into the... That's my theory.
I like it.
So we need to have somebody do it, and we can check out what happens to their universe.
It gets eaten.
Gets eaten up, yeah. Yeah. We get a nice tiger in the course of these, so I think the tiger eats it up.
In the sense that all the universes become zero to the realizer.
That's right. They merge into the zero, which they always really were. And right at the end of this, when I had been working on these talks from the time that they first came into Merwan first brought them out in 1997. And when I came back to them, I was reading all of this and I was thinking, we had assumed these were talks to the Meher Ashram boys, but they couldn't be. They couldn't have a boys' audience for that. So, and then I got to this. So then, try to see God. And when you have succeeded, and the next one he'll say, and so boys. He'll address the boys directly at the end of many of these. And when you have succeeded, boldly assert, I am God. In truth, you are so already. You are God. But you need to see it for yourself. How? By seeking out, placing yourself in front of, and listening to the one who has actually seen, experienced, and united with God, and by doing what he says. And what does Shri, like any realized being, ask and desire of you? Only Prem, right? It's love. Prem and more Prem. And a Sadguru is the very living personification of Prem. So keep on thinking, and thinking continually of your Guru. Go on creating Prem for him. and desiring Prem in return, and you shall get it. He would usually, very often, would end his talks this way. Love, love, love. Even though the lecture itself was not talking about love, it didn't seem to be on that subject, but something was going on in those, in that room.
And he signed off with gold.
Yeah, I know. I'm just copying from the manuscript, so I don't quite understand that. That's the first of them. Now here's so we're just going to be taking little bits and samples. If there's anything particular you'd like to, dip into, although I don't know how you would know because you haven't read the manuscript. But I'll just take little bits from here and there. But this second one is, let me see where we are. Yeah. This is about, he begins this series talking about religion. And this chart comes up. We have 4 or 5 versions of it. Some of them with writing in the Arabic script. But this is a very easily readable version. So here you have, these are the Sufi terms. Do you know Shariat? Sharia is how it was said in Arabic. Tariqat, Marifat, and Hakikat. Do you know those words?
From God Speaks, yeah.
From God Speaks, they're there, yeah. So the Shariat is the husk, the external, the rites, ritual ceremonies, dogmas of conventional religion. And the tariqat is the spiritual path. Some of the Sufi orders are called tariqats, actually. And marifat is inner knowledge. And hakikat, nowadays it usually gets spelled with a Q, hakikat, is truth.
What's the word after religious?
Truth.
Understanding.
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 So religious understanding, the conventional understanding of the religions. Baba hadn't really explained this yet at this time, but looking back, this would look like the subtle sphere as he used it later, and that would look like the mental sphere. Yeah, there are 6 here. There are different numbers in different versions of this diagram. So, like Al-Hallaj, the perfect master who was crucified, would say one of his heretical, blasphemous statements was Anal Haq, I am the truth. That's the same word, Haq and Hakikat. And what Baba is saying is that it's a single line until you get to the emergence of the Shariats. And these are the different religions of the world. So in the course of this talk, he explains what their role is. The Shariats are actually given by God to give a preliminary, provisional understanding for humanity at large, so that humanity at large can get a start. Anyway. But then Baba says something very remarkable. I've never seen anything of his exactly like this. So let's see. Here he's talking about the Shariats, which help the general populace to proceed as easily as possible towards the path, and to enter into the stage of tariqat. So the tariqat, I think tariqat. I have to find out from some good Gujarati speakers. It would be tariqat in Arabic, and whether that's so in Gujarati Indic pronunciation. These rules and regulations established by such spiritual masters as sadgurus are known as the tenets of a religion, to which people attach the name of the religion's founder, as for example, the Zoroastrian religion named after the prophet known as Zoroaster, or the Christian religion named after Christ, the Mohammedan religion after Muhammad, and so forth. Nowadays, we're urged not to call it Mohammedism, but in those days they did. This path, or marga, is called the Shariat Marga, and it is meant for the masses and millions of the world. It represents the first step towards advancement in the spiritual line. Now, why have the Sadgurus and prophets given different religions? Why do they lay down different rules and regulations if their common aim was only to direct the minds of the people towards God? Why different rules for the solution of one common problem? Let us discuss this. Suppose that Shri, a Sadguru, he would call himself a Sadguru in those days, but in one of the later talks, Baba clearly indicates that he was the avatar. It's one of the first times I've ever heard where Baba gave a hint of it, give a clear indication of this. Descends to the world, to turn from worldliness those who have little or perhaps no connection with him from the past, such as members of his circle do. Now, setting aside the matter of his own circle members, who, as a matter of course, he will make God realized, as he himself is, how is he to turn the faces of the masses and millions of the world in the direction of God and the spiritual path? And exactly when will he do this? To bring this to accomplishment, Shri will begin by marking the certain points and factors in the environment, namely the time, place, mentality of the people, their inclinations of bent in mind, and so forth. And after making careful note of these conditions, isn't it funny the way he describes it, sort of like sitting down with your notebook and preparing a class or something like that. He will think of the easiest and best way and will decide upon a particular doctrine, some keynote, with which to guide the people, and he will proceed to preach the same. I mean, I'm thinking in this Advent, Baba's Advent, as a philosophical matter, his keynote was the divine theme. It certainly wasn't with Muhammad. He had very different keynotes, or Jesus. In short, this preaching of a particular doctrine at a particular time for a particular mass of people requires beforehand a close study. There should be a close study and observation of the time, place, circumstances, mentality of the masses, and so forth, as we have said. Every prophet has done this, and each has highlighted his own particular doctrine as he deemed best in view of the time, people, and circumstances. Muhammad, a realized Sadguru, see again, he called him Sadguru, when he came down to the earth plane, decreed certain rules and regulations for the people to follow as he judged best, such as would lead them to the path of truth. So did Buddha in his time, and so did they all. That path laid down and prescribed by each prophet for the general masses of his time is called the Shariat Marga. It constitutes the first step by which one proceeds towards the tariqat and thence onwards towards realization. It must be noted that those immersed in the Shariat Marga, which is to say, the general masses of humanity, are only playing with the outer cover of religion, the real end and aim of which is to realize God. For in their higher object, all religions teach the same thing and indicate rules that the general of humanity towards the one ultimate aim, realizing of self, though their ways and doctrines may differ. Let's say, in accordance with the different times and conditions in which they are preached, and so forth. So I think this is a very remarkable account. You can see Baba's talking to a bunch of boys. It's sort of like Shri has to consider time, studies the matter, and almost like you're preparing for an anniversary and you study who's going to be there and take notes and tables. He's explaining almost that way, but it really does explain a very important point of that each prophet, each avatar has his own keynote and theme. So this is one of the things that he told to these boys. We have about 5 minutes, so let's look at, here's where he starts jumping into. Any comments on this? Or?
Well, just Shariat Margaret is kind of mixing Arabic and Sanskrit.
I know, he does a lot of that.
Right.
And you know, we may take it for granted in our Baba culture, but it's like kind of a big deal.
But
The Shariat Marga, it's like, how dare you associate our Sharia with your lowly, wretched Hindu Margas? Something like that.
Yeah.
So he would just mush this all together. Yeah, there's a good bit of that here. Let me see. Here's a bit of
Who would have been more insulted, the Muslims or the Hindus?
well, nowadays it sounds like the Muslims would be. But Baba in the Tiffin lectures talked about a bit this some. And he would talk about how, you know, the Hindus would blow off the heads of the Muslims and the Muslims would blow off the heads of the Christians. He sort of criticized all of them. Blow off the heads of the Muslims. He took the Christians to task a little bit, but they weren't really in the picture with him yet, so he had to wait for them to arrive. Probably the religion Baba criticized more than any other was Zoroastrianism, as a matter of fact. And I myself think it was kind of courtesy, you know. If you're going to criticize religion, the least offensive way to do it is to criticize your own. So he definitely bashed them, but he took them all. Now, let's see if there is, Baba develops a lot in these early talks, let's see, on a very interesting theme of a metaphor we've seen before, but the ocean, its drops and its bubbles, and also light globes. And he also brings up the topic of foam, which he mentions a number of times but never really fully explains. And since our time is short, I'll say this, that he'll talk about ocean waves and ocean drops. And a wave will have its own bubble, and the drops will have bubbles. And it's, what I infer from it, I try simplifying it, is that a wave might be like a whole Earth, say. And it has its own dimension of reality, so to speak. And the bubble is the manifestation of the wave itself. And the bubble for drops will have bubbles and they'll be contained within waves. And Baba mixes this metaphor up with a lot of talk of what he calls light globes. And it becomes very clear, if you read this closely, that he's not talking about stars, although stars are derived from light globes. But they're apparently something that's on the subtle sphere. Because he says that when you get to the edge of the path, suddenly the light globes become visible to you. And you'll find more about this in the book Early Messages to the West. And the fifth part of it is from How It All Happened, notes Baba was giving for a film, Hollywood film. And there too he talks about this kind of thing. I don't remember if he uses the term light globes. But light globes are an important part of the whole metaphysics that he presents there. And let's see if I can quickly find the spot. He'll say something that when you get to the edge of the path, if you have a guru, a light globe will appear to you and you'll see the image of your master within the light globe. But if you don't have a master, you won't have the image of the master in it. You'll just see the light globes. But stars, it seems, are derived from it. And in fact, our sun is derived from a light globe. I'll have to go into this afternoon. He gives an explanation of the sun and the earth that, unless you've read this before, or versions of it that have appeared, you've never heard anything like this. It's completely different from what we learned in our astronomy classes. Okay, it's 12, so we should take a break. We'll resume at 2. And does, Jeanette, do things need to, we need to move things?
Because of the memorial for Noddy,